All right, for those of you who've just joined us, thank you so much for being here, and we will get started in just a minute. Okay, well, it's 10:32. I think we should get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Janine Benner, and I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Energy. And I really appreciate you spending some of your time with us this morning as we launch this really exciting project, the development of a statewide energy strategy. So next slide, please, Abby. First, I'd like to introduce our agency briefly for those of you who may be less familiar with who we are and what we do. And on this slide, you'll see our vision up at the top there, our mission, and a description of what we do at the Oregon Department of Energy. So I'll just take a moment to share how I see the energy strategy fitting in with the work that we do and advancing our mission. So we envision this energy strategy as a key tool to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. The energy strategy will help the state advance solutions for an equitable clean energy transition, and will really help make sure that as we go through this transition, we're also protecting the environment and public health and responsibly balancing energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Later in this webinar, we'll be talking with other agencies about their role in our state's energy ecosystem. And I just like to make the point here that as we embark on developing an energy strategy, we're not alone. Securing a safe, equitable, clean, and sustainable energy future for Oregon is a shared responsibility, and everyone here today has an important role to play in helping us achieve this collective goal. So at ODO, we'll be working hard to ensure that we fully integrate our areas of expertise into the work of the energy strategy. And on this slide, you'll see the ways that we meet our mission or what we do. So the energy strategy will build upon all of these roles. We'll start with energy data, information, and analysis. We'll gather our partners and interested parties together to think through the challenges to meeting our energy and climate goals and objectives. We'll provide education and technical assistance to help folks engage. And finally, the energy strategy will inform our regulatory responsibilities and our energy programs. We're really excited to be leading this process, and we also are working to approach it with humility, recognizing that no one agency, company, organization, or person has the right answer to how we achieve an affordable, equitable, reliable energy transition. And in fact, I don't actually think there is one answer. And there are a lot of unknowns. So I'd like to thank the legislature for trusting us with this great opportunity and responsibility to lead this process. So at this point, I think it would be great to do some introductions. So I'd like to ask the agency staff on the call to please introduce themselves in the chat. And then for those in the audience, we're going to do a quick poll to see who is joining us. So on the next slide, I think you will see instructions on how you can take the poll. We're using a software called Slido, and it should be found on the right-hand side of your screen near the chat feature. So you may have to click on the little caret where it says Slido if you want the poll to appear. And I think Abby has already launched it. So you'll see the question up there, which is, what perspective are you representing today? We've got lots of options. Maybe you're an elected official or staff of an elected official, a tribal member, government agency, non-governmental organization, lots of different options there. So please feel free to answer that and scroll down to see the other options. And then after you make your selection, please scroll all the way down to where it says send and click that so that it registers here. And I see that Abby's been able to put on the screen for all of us to see who is responding to the poll. So I will give folks a minute to fill that out. It's like we got a lot of government folks on the call today. Okay, there's a lot going on here. Thank you, folks, for introducing yourselves in the chat to the agency participants. And maybe we'll give another 30 seconds for this poll. Remember to fill out what perspective you're representing today, and then scroll down and press send. Okay, I think the responses have slowed down. So Abby, let's go ahead and close this poll. This has been really great. Thank you so much to folks for joining us this morning and participating in the launch of the energy strategy. We really look forward to working with all of you. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to Edith Baer.
Thanks, Janine, for the great welcome, and hello, everybody. My name is Edith Baer, and I'm a Senior Energy Policy Analyst at Odo. A quick run through of the agenda for today, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I'll give a brief introduction to the state energy strategy, and then we'll have a discussion that will include several state agencies on their role in Oregon's energy and climate landscape. We'll then shift over to talk about how you can get involved in this process, followed by a question and answer session. Please note that we'll be taking just written questions, and we encourage you to send us questions throughout the webinar, starting now. Anytime you think of one, just type it into the chat box, and we'll be collecting those questions and doing our best to answer as many as possible during the Q&A. So please don't wait until the last minute. If you have a question, put it in at any time, and we'll gather those together. I'd also like to emphasize that we're in the early stages of developing the energy strategy, so we'll be able to answer questions about the process, but we won't be able to answer more in-depth questions about the energy strategy itself. So next slide. Before I get into the energy strategy, I'd like to give one more slide, please. I'd like to give a bit of background. In 2022, as part of our biennial energy report, we published a policy brief called Charting a Course for Oregon's Energy Future. That paper set out to understand how we can meet the ambitious energy and climate goals that our state has set. Our team reviewed 20 technical studies from around the country that explored ways to meet ambitious clean energy goals, several of which included Oregon as part of the broader analysis. And that review concluded that it is possible to achieve our goals, but, and this was the main conclusion of the paper, Oregon would benefit from having a statewide energy strategy that would help pull together different policies from across the energy sector and build on these policies and programs to develop pathways to meeting our climate and energy goals. The energy strategy could help us meet our goals in a way that's equitable, that addresses trade-offs head-on, and that helps us navigate some complex issues with the best evidence available and in an inclusive way. Next slide, please. So that was in 2022. Fast forward to today, and we're here talking about how the Oregon Department of Energy will lead the development of a state energy strategy. We've been directed in HB 3630 to develop a comprehensive state energy strategy, identifying optimized pathways to achieve Oregon's energy policy objectives. The Oregon Department of Energy is expected to deliver a report to the governor and legislature by November 1st, 2025, leaving us just under 2 years to develop the strategy. The legislation focuses on or around 3 main elements: engagement to inform the strategy, pathways to meeting Oregon's energy policy objectives, and policy and legislative recommendations to support us getting there. Next slide, please. Here's a more detailed look at how these main elements are elaborated in the legislation. First, if you look at the left-hand side, the strategy must be informed by stakeholder perspectives and by all of the existing laws, policies, programs, utility plans, and other studies available. We're not starting from scratch. We're working with all of the pieces that are already there. Next, if you take a look at the columns here with the orange heading, you can see that the energy strategy needs to take into account a number of factors. We start with energy demand and trends. That is how we use energy today and how does our energy system meet that demand, and then how do we expect that picture to change over time. The rest of this column summarizes the resources we must consider in exploring different pathways, starting with energy efficiency, other energy resources, including fuels, power generation technologies, how we deliver energy to where it's used through wires, pipelines, charging stations, and emerging technologies that might be in early stages of development today, but could really give us a boost in the future. The right-hand orange column, kind of on the right-hand side of this orange block in the middle, are our balancing factors. How do we ensure that we understand how to advance an energy transition that accounts for the broader considerations that we see here? I'll come back to these in a moment in another slide. Finally, if you look at the column on the right, engagement, this is really a central pillar of the whole process, as Janine has already mentioned, and my colleague Ruchi Sadir will talk more about how we plan to engage with you and others across the state a little later on. In addition to all of these considerations, we have to make sure that the energy strategy reflects the best available information and time horizons. We're looking at the long-term objectives that we've set that reach out to 2050, as well as some key interim years. Finally, the energy strategy is meant to be a resource over time, and that means that we will periodically revisit it, and we're committed to it serving as a resource for our state now and into the future. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize here just a couple of points about the scope of the energy strategy. The purpose of this slide is not to read off a bunch of statistics about our energy sector. That'll come later. It's to emphasize that this will be an energy strategy, not an electricity strategy, not a transportation strategy. We'll be looking across the whole energy sector. And this slide is meant to give a bird's eye view of what that means. On the left, you can see all of our sources of energy and their shares in our primary energy mix in 2020, which is the last year for which we gathered this data. Stay tuned next year for an update in our biennial energy report. On the right, you can see where we use that energy. And one of the key points here is that we all use energy for our daily lives, work, learning, travel, leisure. The energy strategy touches us all, and we will need to build on many perspectives and sources of expertise for the strategy to be effective. We're also seeing a lot of overlap between sectors that's newer, like electricity and transport, and a connected view of the energy sector can help us navigate some of those trends. So if we go to the next slide, so to really understand which pathways best balance the benefits of different choices with their costs, we need to think about much more than just energy itself. Here I'm coming back to a subset of that more detailed slide I showed earlier. So in developing the energy strategy, we will be weighing the costs and benefits of different pathways to 2050, not just in financial terms, but in a broader understanding of the benefits and trade-offs involved with different choices. Here we have some of the main areas that we'll need to balance. We'll be looking at the effects of different pathways on land and water use. We'll need to consider how to ensure equity in who benefits and ensure that no group is disproportionately burdened by the energy transition. We'll need to think about economic effects, including the effect on energy bills, as well as opportunities for economic development, training, and jobs. And we'll need to always come back to whether we're on track to maintain a reliable and resilient energy system. Next slide. So let me turn now to the process. As I've said, we have 2 years to develop the energy strategy, and over those 2 years, we plan to have 2 cycles of engagement, analysis, review, and comment, as you can see here. The first year, 2024, we'll be focusing mainly on the technical analysis, and we will be contracting someone to help us with that work. This will involve defining the key questions the energy strategy will undertake to answer, collecting data and information, and modeling different scenarios to understand how we can meet our climate and energy goals and the implications of different pathways. While the modeling analysis will help us understand the what needs to be done to achieve Oregon's climate and energy goals, the legislative and policy recommendations, the policy analysis here on the slide, will help us understand the how. How can policies and legislation steer Oregon towards meeting its goals? Where are there gaps and barriers, and how can they be overcome? That will be the focus towards the end of 2024 and into 2025. We'll then combine all of these materials to draft the report, again, provide an opportunity for comment, and finalize the report by the deadline of November 1st, 2025. It's worth noting that the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant from the US EPA is supporting this project, and that a report under that grant will be due in August of 2025 ahead of the statutory deadline. So if we can go to the next slide, as I said, the first step in developing an energy strategy will be to define the key questions that we want to try to answer. Here are just a few questions that Odo is asking and that we hope the energy strategy will be able to help answer. First, what are the no or low regrets options to meeting our goals? We know that there will be some tough decisions on trade-offs, but we should really first try to identify and maximize the least regrets options to reaching our climate and energy goals. Next question, how can the strategy help address knowledge gaps to help us better weigh the benefits of trade-offs of different pathways to achieve our climate and energy targets? We're still missing some of the information that could help us better understand the more detailed effects of different pathways on our state. And finally, what more is needed to help meet our existing statutory goals? The draft recommendations could include proposed legislation, programs, policies, incentives or grants, future research questions, interagency collaboration, and other recommendations to help us meet our goals. So before I hand the floor to my colleague, Amy Schlesser, I have our next polling question, which relates to different areas that we'll be exploring in the energy strategy. And I don't have that question up here, but it should be popping up shortly. There it is. So the question is, please rank the following aspects of the energy strategy by order of priority to you. So at the top, you would mark the topic that is highest priority and then kind of go down in reverse order. And the options are cost, keeping energy bills down, reliability. We have environmental protection, productive land and water use, equity and access, jobs and economic growth, and other. And this is really just to start understanding in the audience kind of where people's focus is and where people's priorities lie to understand balance in the room, the virtual room. And I should add that none of this is to say that any of these are more important than others. I think in the end, it depends a little bit on perspective, particularly for people who are working in these different areas and spending their time focusing on specific topics. So I see we already have 43 answers, and I'd say it's pretty even actually, which is not surprising. So I think maybe we'll stop here, but I'll just add that this question will stay up while we move on in the presentation. So if you still haven't answered, feel free to do so, and we'll collect all of these answers at the end. So Amy, I'll pass the floor over to you.
Great, thanks, Edith. Could I get these? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Schlesser. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm going to give a brief overview of what Oregon's energy landscape looks like today to provide some context around the scope and scale of the energy strategy. Then I'm going to invite some staff from some other key Oregon agencies up to describe how their work fits into this landscape. So next slide, please. Thank you. This diagram from ODO's, Oregon Department of Energy's 2022 Biennial Energy Report reflects the flow of energy in Oregon in 2020. The left side of the diagram shows how much of Oregon's energy is produced in the state and how much of our energy is imported from other places. The middle of the diagram shows how this energy is produced, and the right side shows how this energy is used. Now, as this diagram shows, Oregon produces most of the electricity we use, and most of that electricity is generated by renewable resources, mainly hydro and wind. Most of this electricity is used in Oregon,
and any surplus electricity we produce is exported to other states. Now, in contrast to the energy produced in Oregon, nearly all of the energy imported into the state is fossil fuel based, including all of the natural gas and petroleum fuels consumed in the state, as well as electricity from coal-fired power plants outside of Oregon. About half of the natural gas imported into Oregon is used to generate electricity, and the other half is used as a direct use fuel in buildings and industrial facilities. Imported gasoline and diesel fuels are used primarily for transportation. And as you can see from the vertical black bar on the right side of this diagram, a large portion of Oregon's energy is wasted due to inefficiencies across the system. So if we can reduce the amount of energy we waste, we won't need to produce or import as much energy to meet our needs. Next slide, please. This slide shows Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions by sector from 1990 to 2019. As illustrated by the dark gray and light green bands at the bottom of the chart, the transportation and electricity sectors are the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. After steadily increasing over the 1990s and then staying relatively constant in the early 2000s, Oregon had a notable decline in greenhouse gas emissions from 2007 to 2012. Over the past decade, however, the state's emissions began to rise again. The horizontal lines on this graph represent Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. The yellow line, the topmost line, represents the state's interim 2020 goal to reduce emissions to 10% below 1990 levels by 2020. Oregon did not achieve this goal. The bright blue line in the middle represents Oregon's interim 2035 greenhouse gas reduction goal. And then the green and pink lines at the bottom represent the state's 2050 goals. The green line is the goal set by statute, and the pink line reflects the slightly more ambitious goal set by Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04. The Oregon Energy Strategy will evaluate pathways to achieve the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals and achieve compliance with other energy and climate policies in effect today, including the 100% clean electricity target established by HB 2021 and the Climate Protection Program's declining cap on fossil fuel emissions. Next slide, please. Achieving Oregon's energy and climate policy objectives will alter the state's energy landscape in a variety of ways. For example, this chart shows Oregon's electricity mix in 2020. While hydropower provided the largest portion of the state's electricity from a resource basis, the majority of the electricity consumed in Oregon in 2020 was generated from fossil fuels. Next slide, please. To achieve the 100% clean electricity standard established by HB 2021, the coal and natural gas power that Oregon consumed in 2020 will, by 2040, need to be replaced with renewable electricity resources like wind and solar power, as well as with demand-side resources that increase energy efficiency and shift when and how we use electricity. Next slide, please. Slide. Thank you. This chart shows the breakdown of Oregon's transportation fuel mix in 2020. And as you can see, a large majority of Oregon's transportation sector continues to be fueled by gasoline and diesel. Next slide, please. To achieve the Climate Protection Program's 2050 emissions cap, most of Oregon's fossil-based transportation fuels will need to be replaced by a combination of clean electricity and low-carbon fuels. Next slide, please. The Oregon energy landscape is undergoing a profound transition. This transition is partly being driven by the state's energy and climate policies, and it's also partly due to evolving technologies and market demands. This means that there are a lot of moving pieces in Oregon's energy landscape, some of which are easier to anticipate and influence than others. And overlying this shifting energy landscape is a complex regulatory framework administered by a variety of state agencies, and most notably by the 6 agencies depicted here, including the Public Utility Commission, or PUC, the Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, the Oregon Department of Transportation, ODOT, Business Oregon, and the Oregon Department of Energy, ODO. These 6 agencies are all tasked with administering programs and policies that affect the evolving energy landscape in one way or another. And this slide is chaotic and confusing by design. And it isn't meant to convey the full scope of each agency's energy-related regulatory portfolio. The visual is mainly intended to illustrate how the work of these 6 agencies touch the ways in which we procure and use energy in Oregon, and how this work overlaps in a variety of ways. And so now I'd like to invite representatives from each of these agencies to take a few minutes and describe how their work intersects with Oregon's energy landscape. And to start, I'm going to invite up Caroline Moore from the Oregon Public Utility Commission.
Hi, thanks, Amy. Like Amy mentioned, my name is Caroline Moore. My title is Administrator of the Strategy and Integration Division at a state agency called the Public Utility Commission. I'm very excited to be here today and to be part of this process. As Amy just showed, there's a lot of overlap and need for coordination in implementing all the state's energy goals. So thanks for having us. For those who aren't familiar with our agency, every state has a public utility commission of some sort that provides economic regulation of the privately owned monopoly providers of essential utility services. So here in Oregon, that includes 3 electric utilities: Portland General Electric, or PGE, PacifiCorp, who's known as Pacific Power in Oregon, and Idaho Power Company, which just kind of bleeds a little chunk of Eastern Oregon service territory from their focus on Idaho, as well as numerous, and 3 natural gas utilities: Northwest Natural, Cascade Natural Gas, and Avista. We also oversee numerous telecommunications companies on the landline side and privately owned water utilities. And for folks who are familiar, we also oversee the Energy Trust of Oregon. In Oregon, the PUC's mission is to ensure customers of these privately owned utilities have access to safe, reliable, and fairly priced utility services that advance state policy and promote the public interest. So it's a big balancing act between those things. The PUC is led by a full-time 3-member commission that's appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And we implement a variety of statutory directives. We review detailed technical information. We receive and adjudicate legal disputes, and we engage with a wide array of stakeholders and policymakers on a wide range of issues that affect these utility companies that we regulate. And as you would expect, our role is focused on policies, or the piece of policies that impact the electric and gas utilities that we regulate. So sometimes we're solely responsible for overseeing implementation and compliance with a policy, or most of it. And then sometimes our focus is really working with the utilities on an ongoing basis on their planning and their investments to comply with a policy that might be part of a bigger implementation framework involving other agencies. A good example that you guys might hear about shortly would be the Climate Protection Program. So as the energy sector undergoes its transformation, the PUC's scope of work and the way that we conduct our open public decision-making processes are also transforming. And with that, I can explain a little bit about this slide in front of you, and that might tell you more about what that transformation on our side of things means. So this slide is a snapshot of the PUC's side of the state energy policy journey that we're on. This is not meant to be comprehensive by any means. It's really just hitting some of the highlights, and only from the perspective of what the PUC is really focused on. So one thing I'm hoping that this slide conveys is that there's a pretty broad landscape of policies that we implement with our stakeholders and our utilities. And then the second is that the nature of the policies and therefore our focus and approach has been evolving in some very meaningful ways. And I'll definitely caveat that plenty of things were happening before the Renewable Portfolio Standard passed in 2007. A lot of our like deep roots in energy conservation and kind of small distributed renewables go back much farther than that. But it's easy to look at the modern journey that we're on and the landscape that we're on if we start with the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which passed in 2007 and requires the electric companies to generate an increasing amount of renewable energy over time until originally they reached 25% of renewable energy in 2025. In 2015, we increased those required levels of clean energy build and added a few more technology-focused requirements, such as establishing community solar programs, creating small-scale resource carve-outs, promoting transportation electrification, demand-side resources. And up to that point, the state's clean energy policies were really kind of straightforward. They were focusing on mandating a minimum investment in like a specific type of technology. But eventually, with policies like the governor's 2020 executive order on climate change, we saw a bit of a conversation shift on our end of things, where people on our side of things started talking more holistically about reducing emissions at a certain level, which would require utilities to actually reduce their use of things that create emissions, which is different than just stacking emissions-free investments on top of fossil fuel resources. So this kind of more holistic look at climate policy also not just a transition from technology-based mandates to kind of like holistic emissions targets. We also saw an increasing focus on making sure the transition away from emitting resources would be what we're calling just. So that means that it would be done in a way that brings customers and communities along. It drives community benefits. It really cares about community impacts. And it's a very important element, but it also adds another dimension of balancing and complexity, where you're incorporating justice as well as trying to be affordable, trying to be reliable and resilient, and meet emissions reductions, which are, you know, it's kind of like when you hire a contractor and you do things like fast, cheap, and good. It's like, you know, these balancing acts that we're constantly trying to strike. So in 2021, when we saw a bill called House Bill 2021 pass on the electric side, it set some ambitious emissions reduction targets for the electric sector for the companies that we regulate. But it was also part of a bigger package that paired emissions reductions targets with policies that emphasize community impacts and benefits, reducing energy burdens, consideration for things that would really impact communities like wildfire mitigation planning, and kind of a broader look at you know, equity and justice in the transition, making sure people come along with us. So there's a lot more going on this slide, but I know there's other folks that you guys want to hear from. So with that, I can pass it to the next speaker.
Thank you, Caroline. That was a great overview. And now I'm going to invite Colin McConaughey from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to come up and tell us a little bit about DEQ's work.
Great, thank you, Amy. I just want to confirm you can see and hear me? Great, right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Colin McConaughey. I manage the Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And I won't give the same overview of our agency that I heard Caroline provide for the Public Utility Commission, primarily because our agency has a lot of programs that are not as squarely focused on energy and climate as the Public Utility Commission's mission is. We have a wide variety of programs, most of them regulatory, pertaining to various aspects of environmental quality here in the state of Oregon, including land quality, water quality, and air quality. And Increasingly, in recent years, programs more squarely focused on energy and climate, and that's what I'll dive into this morning. Our role at DEQ to help meet Oregon's climate and energy goals that I understand is the focus here this morning in this meeting. We have. I won't be exhaustive here. I'm going to highlight some of the programs we have at DEQ focused on climate and energy, and most, again, we're primarily a regulatory agency, so most of these programs are regulatory in nature, but some of them are not, and I want to give a nod to those non-regulatory aspects as well. And I'll start in the regulatory realm. It's been mentioned a couple times already this morning by Amy and Caroline, and that is our Climate Protection Program. This is a program relatively new. It was adopted late in 2021 and took effect in 2022. And the Climate Protection Program establishes mandatory and enforceable limits on greenhouse gas emissions. So these are different in nature than those goals that were mentioned earlier that legislature adopted I think in 2007, and the different goals that were articulated in an executive order from a few years ago. This program establishes limits that must be met over a portion of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions, and those specifically the emissions from the use of fossil fuels in Oregon. So the use of fossil fuels in our transportation sector and in our buildings, the use of natural gas, use of gasoline, diesel. And those limits decline over time gradually toward two primary milestones. In 2035, the reduction is 50% in greenhouse gas emissions from those fossil fuels I just mentioned, and then 90% reduction in those fossil fuels by 2050. And I'll flag that notably, this program does not cover fossil fuels used to generate electricity that's used in Oregon. And that is covered in another program that also has already been mentioned, those clean energy targets from House Bill 2021 directly pertain to reductions in the electricity sector. But if I would stay for a moment here on the Climate Protection Program, a big piece of this program, a key piece that we are setting up right now at DEQ is our community climate investments piece. And I say that's a key piece because it is, I believe, will be a central component in ensuring that those reductions that this program requires, that those are enjoyed and benefit all Oregonians, and specifically in our environmental justice communities that are feeling the effects of climate change first and worst, and also if without specific aid are also perhaps least able to transition and benefit from those cleaner alternative energy sources. So the Community Climate Investment Program really, I think, deserves a separate call out here. I haven't done that in this slide, I realize. And again, that's something that we are just in the midst of developing and standing up as a part of the implementation of this, again, relatively new program. And then secondly, listed there, our Clean Fuels Program. This is a more mature program. It's been in place since 2016, and it's squarely focused on our transportation sector. As you saw in an earlier slide from Edith, our transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. And so there's a lot of focus on that sector. And our Clean Fuels Program is really leading the way in decarbonizing our transportation sector and the energy that we use in our transportation sector. It's a life cycle based program, so it looks at the entirety of the emissions associated with the production and the use of transportation energy. So not just at the tailpipe emissions from use of gasoline, diesel, ethanol, renewable diesel, electricity, but all the upstream emissions as well. So it's a very comprehensive program in regards to its focus, again, the transportation sector. we recently expanded this program. Our Environmental Quality Commission, which is the commission that adopts the rules that our agency governs. It's a 5-member governor-appointed, Senate-confirmed commission. The Environmental Quality Commission last year expanded the program. It was initially scoped out through 2025 to be a 10% reduction in the life cycle carbon intensity of transportation fuels. And the Environmental Quality Commission extended it another decade and nearly quadrupled that standard to a 37% reduction by 2035. And then I'll just note that DEQ has a relatively limited but important role in the implementation of House Bill 2021 that was mentioned already. Specifically, our role is in the greenhouse gas accounting components that measure, or actually I'll say the first establish specifically what those greenhouse gas reduction targets are for the parties that are regulated, primarily chiefly PGE and Pacific Power, as well as the electricity service suppliers. It's the greenhouse gas accounting rules that our agency establishes that dictate what exactly those targets are, and then measures going forward whether we're achieving those reductions. In the interest of time, I'll move along here. We also have a couple of different programs that require zero emission vehicle mandates on vehicle suppliers in Oregon, specifically covering both light and medium and heavy duty vehicle classes. And then we have some non-regulatory programs. And first and foremost, I would flag our EV rebate programs that now include both, again, light and medium and heavy duty vehicle classes. And then I want to give a nod as well to a variety of programs, actually a wide suite of different efforts at DEQ that fall under our materials management programs. These include programs like environmental product declarations that allow for suppliers of materials like cement to declare and make available the life cycle emissions associated with the production and use and disposal of those products, allowing for consumers of those products to make more informed decisions about where they source those materials. And then I have one more slide real quickly, I believe, before I hand it over. I'm just wanting to note, this is not DEQ's slide. This is a slide that was produced by the Oregon Global Warming Commission and their efforts supported by the Department of Energy, forecasting greenhouse gas emissions with some of those programs I just mentioned. And this is glossing over a wide variety of different programs that also enable and help us better achieve the mandated reductions by some of those programs I just mentioned, chiefly the clean energy targets and the reductions required by the Climate Protection Program, showing a dramatic departure from previous greenhouse gas forecasts that showed our emissions going up. And now, as a consequence of some of these programs I just mentioned, showing a steep departure from that and a dramatic reduction. But I think I'm at time, so Amy, I'm going to hand it back to you to pass it to the next agency.
Thank you, Colin. Next up, I'd like to invite Alexis Hammer from the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Yes, thank you, Amy. And my name is Alexis Hammer. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the legislative coordinator for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. We are a small but mighty agency of about 74 staff. And our regulatory scope includes regulating how counties and cities are zoning land for land use, with a comprehensive framework of 19 statewide goals that counties and cities must balance as they're making decisions about what is permitted to be built where. And the 19 goals, I won't go over all of them right now. That could be a whole different webinar, but there's a few that really stand out in the context of the energy conversation that I want to highlight. A lot of folks are familiar with the Oregon's urban growth boundary system and what is permitted inside of an urban growth boundary versus outside of an urban growth boundary. Kind of helps people think about, how we manage and prioritize things in Oregon. The goals 3 and 4 and 5 are protective goals around what is permitted in rural areas. Goal 3 is about the protection of agricultural lands. Goal 4 is about the protection of forest lands. And goal 5 is protection of natural and cultural resources. And on the flip side of that regulatory sphere is the urban goals. And those, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's goals 9, which is goals for economic development and how we're planning for jobs inside of cities. Goal 10, which is our housing goal. And goal 12 is our transportation goal, as well as goal 14, which focuses on, as we're urbanizing, trying to prioritize lands to be urbanized that are lower quality resource lands. So we're not, if a city is growing, it's not moving out into farmland to the degree it can. It will instead move to lower quality non-resource lands. And I guess from some of the bigger picture about how land use and how to think about land use and energy development is that the goals were developed prior to in 1973, and our agency was established in 1973 after this passage of Senate Bill 100. And it was before renewable energy was very viable in an economic way, and before we really understood climate change and had the big picture of how energy and climate change are related. And so the land use goals, as they were originally formed, did not take into account the energy goals that we're talking about here today. And they're 50 years old, and they have been updated throughout time. And I'll go over that real quickly. But the first goals related explicitly, the first rules that we wrote that were explicitly around the siting of energy facilities were developed in the 1990s for exceptions to our goals 3 and 4 around farm and forest land, to allow for only up to 12 to 20 acres of land to be converted for natural gas facilities. And the energy siting conversation has taken new form as the technology has improved over the years. And for example, in the early 2000s, DLCD adopted rules for the siting of wind energy and allowing a more flexible process to allow for the siting of more wind generation facilities. And you can see that today in the prevalence of wind in Eastern Oregon. The last thing I'd like to note is that we also have a big piece of our regulatory sphere is around the siting of solar development. And we also have a jurisdictional area around that helps with the siting of solar facilities for counties and the ways that counties are siting solar. But there's also the Oregon Department of Energy has the Energy Facility Siting Council, which handles the larger acreage for the really large industrial scale solar facilities. And so there's kind of this bifurcation of smaller and medium-sized energy facilities up to, and it depends the regulatory thresholds of what comes under DLCD authority versus and county authority versus the energy FSAC or the Energy Facility Siting Council is based on soil quality, where if it's very high value farmland or forest land, it is more protective and restrictive so that anything that's larger than, I don't have the number at the tip of my fingers, but it's on the order of hundreds or 200 acres, versus when we go into lower quality non-arable lands, that larger facilities can be sited by counties. So with that in mind, I want to just talk about current rulemaking that we've been tasked in the last legislative session. House Bill 3409 created a process that DLCD is undertaking to develop rules on the siting of solar facilities and trying to find a sweet spot, more or less, where we are able to protect some conservation values around cultural and natural resources, and at the same time reducing the burden and creating more land that is available for the siting of solar facilities in Eastern Oregon. And the reason the Eastern Oregon is focused on for this legislation is because there is typically less conflict compared to Willamette Valley or Southern Oregon, where there's higher quality farmland soils and also less sun. So Eastern Oregon, by July 1st of 2025, we will have a new process that will allow counties to streamline the permitting of solar facilities in those counties at their discretion if they would like to. Another component of our regulatory sphere and statewide energy strategy is our management. DLCD is the home of the Oregon Coastal Management Program, where we have the responsibility of working with other agencies to make sure that there's consistency among our state policies and federal policies within the coastal management zone, which goes from the I believe it's within 9 miles of the coast to 3 miles into the ocean. And the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, I think I got that right, it's called BOEM, is currently undertaking a process to scope and figure out where and figure out the feasibility of siting energy facilities or offshore wind energy facilities off the coast of Oregon. And so we're the point agency for that regulatory coordination. And finally, I want to touch on our Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities program. And this isn't a direct regulatory tie to energy use, but it is about reducing vehicle miles traveled, or making sure that in community, we build complete communities that allow folks to get around and meet their daily needs without having to rely exclusively on personal automobiles. It's not to say we're planning on removing or not having personal automobiles, but just that we locate both our residential and our commercial and industrial facilities in a way that allows people to walk, bike, or take transit as an option to get where they need to go, or get to the doctor's office or the grocery store. And that in turn will have an effect on how much gasoline is used for personal lightweight automobiles. And that's pretty much the big picture of land use regulation and how we touch on the strategy. And I think one final note I'd like to mention is that it's important as we undertake these rules, especially around the solar siting process, to understand and have clarity on how we're using the land use system and the land use values to inform energy policy, and vice versa, how energy policy is informing the land use system and how we should be shaping our land uses throughout the state. And that's a dynamic conversation that I think requires a lot of public input. So we're happy to be here, and thanks for the time.
Thank you, Alexis. Now I would like to invite Amanda Peets from the Oregon Department of Transportation up.
Great, thank you, Amy. Well, you'll hear a lot of similar themes as I go through this portion of our slide. My name is Amanda Peets. I'm the Policy Development and Analysis Division Administrator with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I focus primarily on kind of climate and energy side of things, from reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but of course we look comprehensively at all of climate. To start with, up at the top of the screen is the new Oregon Transportation Plan that was adopted just a few months ago by our Transportation Commission. Sets the vision that really includes climate front and center. It says that we support all Oregonians by connecting people and goods to places in the most climate friendly, equitable, and safe ways. So in order to enact that, we integrate climate into our planning, our investment decisions, construction, maintenance, and really all of our other works. We have a commitment to add those three lenses of climate, equity, and safety into every single decision that we make as an organization. Some of the ways that are highlighted on here in which we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption overall is two main strategies. First of which you've heard about from our partners at DLCD, but includes reducing passenger vehicle miles traveled per capita. We have a goal in our Oregon Transportation Plan of reducing VMT by 20% by 2050. The other is by making every single mile driven clean. So there's folks that can transition to not drive as much or use cleaner vehicles, cleaner modes of transportation, excuse me. But for those that must drive or need to drive, we need to make sure every single mile is driven is clean. So we're trying to get to a reduction of 77% of CO2 equivalent per mile by the year 2050. Some of the things that we're doing kind of within these categories, we're trying to transition to low and no emission modes, biking, walking, and public transportation. As I mentioned, adding that climate lens means we're being accountable to climate impacts. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so have fewer projects that increase emissions, more that reduce emissions. At the same time, we're looking at resiliency and adapting to the impacts that climate has on the transportation system and in the state of Oregon in general. These have pretty significant impacts from closures, economic impacts to communities, loss of life, and so much more that we really need to pay attention to. We've worked to secure additional funding for these low and no emission modes. We have more and more going each year to multimodal investments as we can. However, our federal dollars and state dollars are pretty limited moving forward, so our ability to continue to do this will be challenged, I think, here in the next coming years. But it is a priority for us. That's something that we're continuing to try to make it biking, walking, transit more accessible, more convenient, and efficient. We utilize transportation demand management strategies. We created a transportation options program about a decade ago after we created our statewide transportation strategy on greenhouse gas emission reduction. That program gets to some of the employer services, employer programs, parking management, some of the things that you heard DEQ mention briefly. We are looking at pricing strategies so that it's more efficient to take those modes from a cost perspective. And as was talked about with the LCD, supporting conducive land use to enable trips by biking, walking, and transit. Some of the needs we have in the future, kind of moving forward, that potentially this energy strategy could help to identify and work together on is maximizing the use of the existing system. So how can we take advantage of existing capacity and kind of an energy efficiency per person in terms of travel and trips. We also, in transition to cleaner vehicles and fuels, our primary focus is on transportation electrification, and that is for all levels of electrification. So electric bikes and scooters to passenger cars and trucks to freight trucks, transit buses, and more. So we're working on adding and making a pretty substantial investment of over $100 million on transportation electrification charging infrastructure to have those publicly accessible. We're also pursuing grants around hydrogen.
Amanda, I think you might have just muted.
Be back now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. My phone decided to drop me. So I think lastly, we're pursuing grants for a medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure. And I think there's a need in the future to continue with our partners at Department of Energy and otherwise to work on understanding the grid capacity for electrification in the context of kind of overall electricity demand, identify load management opportunities to share kind of between vehicles and houses and other needed electricity, and how to optimize other alternative fuels. I think you'll hear kind of throughout, hopefully, these conversations with the state agencies that there's a lot of overlap. That's purposeful. We have what's called Every Mile Counts between multiple agencies to try to reach many of these goals that I talked about here. And we meet on a routine and regular basis across agencies to work on these things in collaboration and together. An example of that I'll share in the chat is our emission reduction website that tracks our greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector overall, including all the work that you heard about from Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Energy, and others. So I'll share that and then turn it back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And now, last but certainly not least, I would like to invite Michael Held from Business Oregon to take the mic.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And before I get started, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear.
Perfect, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. As Amy said, my name is Michael Held. I'm the Regional Services Manager at Business Oregon. So for those who don't know Business Oregon, we're the state's economic development agency. Our mission is to invest in Oregon businesses, communities, and people to promote a globally diverse and competitive economy. I'll dig into our role a little bit as it relates to meeting Oregon's climate goals, but do want to note that the energy sector isn't an area where we have a large presence, but we do engage in a few different ways. We are part of the executive branch. We're a non-regulatory agency. We have a little over 90 programs these days within two primary large buckets. The first being infrastructure development, the second being business development and industry development. So on the infrastructure side, for us, that looks like water, wastewater, broadband, seismic rehabilitation, brownfield redevelopment. We have a levee program and a lot of other infrastructure-related programs. Basically, everything besides roads and energy. That's why we have ODOT and ODO here. On the business development and industry side, we help companies in a number of ways through capital access programs. We manage some business incentive programs and support our local partners as they administer various tax abatement programs like the Enterprise Zone and Strategic Investment Program, which some of our energy projects have taken advantage over the years. We also have an innovation and entrepreneurship division. So this is a team focused on creating innovators, entrepreneurs. Just kind of one example of their work is partnering with emerging industry universities to help commercialize different technologies that hopefully can have a positive impact on our economy and environments. This sometimes looks like helping startups demonstrate product viability and then helping them bring those to market. Kind of more specifically to the question posed about our role in helping meet Oregon's energy goals, I think there are several direct and indirect ways in which we're doing this. First and foremost, I just kind of want to start out with acknowledging that our work is really relationship driven. So even before we think of programs and strategies, that's kind of where we start. We have deep relationships across the state with businesses and industries. We have a regional services team that cover all corners of the state, and they're really tasked with understanding what the business needs, issues, and opportunities are. And then we also work with a very robust and extensive provider network through a number of different programs. But some of those partners look like the Small Business Development Centers, Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, GCAP, Government Contract Assistance Program, now known as APEX, and dozens of other organizations that serve specific geographic or culturally specific communities across Oregon. And I start with the importance of relationships to this conversation because, we are a non-regulatory agency, so we can often have different conversations than maybe our sister agencies can have. So that's perhaps something to explore further. But because of these relationships, I think it's, the opportunity to address some of the climate goals is really creating those public-private partnerships to marry the opportunities to grow and expand Oregon businesses and meet those climate goals. Kind of more specifically, one way we're currently doing that is through a variety of our business expansion, retention, and recruitment programs, as well as our innovation and entrepreneurship activities. We are regularly meeting with companies to discuss with them about how to scale production capacities, adopt new technologies, many of which have energy reduction components, but then also result in supporting of a company's bottom line. So I think some of the other work more at the sector level, we are looking at ways that we can support the clean tech sector. For us, our working definition of clean tech is companies that are providing products or services that result in carbon reduction. We're currently pulling together a study that will begin in early 24 that will help us look as a state and Business Oregon about how we can grow this sector. As part of this analysis, I think understanding Oregon's energy future is essential so that we can have a discussion around how to maintain and grow our kind of manufacturing competitiveness in Oregon. And then shifting just a little bit more to the infrastructure side for a moment, we help communities maintain and modernize various systems, whether that's to meet existing or emerging needs and opportunities. Particularly, many of our infrastructure programs are oriented to help the communities that are most under-resourced. There's certainly a role, I think, for this type of infrastructure to help meet the climate goals, just by simply ensuring that traditional infrastructure, the gray infrastructure, supports safe and livable communities. So I guess just to summarize, we work closely with industry to try to identify those opportunities to help kind of grow and scale industry here in the state. I think there's a clear need for public-private partnerships to come together to find and advance solutions. So, thank you for having us part of this conversation, and we look forward to engaging with folks on this call. And thank Odo for having us here.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I just want to make a huge thanks to all of our agency colleagues that participated on the call and provided those really helpful overviews today. Now I would like to pass it over to my colleague Ruchi Sadir from the Oregon Department of Energy to talk a little bit about the outreach and engagement provisions and steps that we are undertaking for the energy strategy. And Ruchi, I believe that I think you are going to ask the next polling question. Is that correct?
I think that if you go back one slide, there is a polling question that we can get started with. Thanks, Amy.
Great. And so that should pop up on the side of your screen in just a moment.
Thanks, Amy. So this question is asking which state agencies you engage with most on energy-related issues. You just heard from a number of these agencies, and so wanted to get a sense from you. Give you all a moment to check all the boxes that might apply. Seeing a lot of Oregon Department of Energy, PUC, DEQ, a few that don't typically engage on energy-related issues with agencies. Seeing a few more people add some thoughts, but it's slowing down. Give you all a few more moments here to check all the agencies that you engage with on energy-related issues. Okay, I think it's slowed down, Abby. So we can go to the next slide here. So as you heard from Amy, my name is Ruchi Sadir. I'm Associate Director for Strategic Engagement at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm going to cover a couple slides here on outreach and engagement. Next slide, please. So going back to the statute, the bill that you heard about earlier in this webinar, HB 3630 calls on Oregon Department of Energy to engage with relevant state agencies, federally recognized Indian tribes, and stakeholders in developing the strategy. And at a minimum, the stakeholders need to represent a diverse range of interests, perspectives, expertise in education, socioeconomic backgrounds, communities, and geographic areas of the state. We want this process to have different types of input and feedback opportunities, and we want to lower barriers to participation to ensure all communities can participate. We want to provide ways that make it easier for local governments, tribal communities, and currently and historically underserved communities to provide input and feedback. So far, this has already included formal notification and coordination with the 9 federally recognized Native American tribes in Oregon. We're also working to bring on a contractor to help support facilitation and outreach and engagement needed for the development of the energy strategy. And we're still working on that RFP. So some of the details are not known yet, but we're going to share what we do know. But before diving in, we have another poll for you. Next slide, please. I think that the next question will come up in Slido in a moment. So this question is asking how you would characterize your level of expertise on energy-related issues. Just trying to get a sense of sort of the expertise that you might have, or where we might want to focus our project in developing the energy strategy to support your participation. So you have a couple options here in terms of very knowledgeable in at least one energy-related area, being a bit more of a generalist or split time between energy and other topics, reasonably knowledgeable in at least one energy-related area, or knowledgeable in another area and want to engage on how energy will affect that area. I'm going to give you all a few more moments here to select. Just a reminder to scroll down to hit send when you're done with your selection. Seeing the numbers take up here, so I'm going to give you a little bit more time. Looks like it's slowing down a little bit. I think we can move on to the next slide here in a few seconds here. So if you want to hit send before we do. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So I know there's a lot on this slide. We're trying to show the different ways we are seeking input and engagement in the process. I want to first point out the note on the bottom right where we are open to your ideas and other options too. So walking through the slide a little bit, we'll be forming 3 groups to help inform the design and direction of the energy strategy: an interagency steering group, an advisory group, and a technical working group. These groups might also be organized into subgroups or committees as well to help focus discussion and best use participants' time. They will provide an ongoing opportunity to understand perspectives and priorities and create forums for information sharing and feedback throughout the development of the energy strategy. And as I mentioned before, this process for actually developing these groups, the timing of the meetings and the interaction between the groups are still a work in progress and are being developed. But you did just hear from members of one of the groups today, the Interagency Steering Group, which will serve to ensure that the energy strategy builds on the expertise, perspectives, existing programs, and efforts of state agencies in their own roles in the clean energy transition. So that included the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Land Conservation Development, Oregon Department of Transportation, Oregon Public Utility Commission, Business Oregon, and the Governor's Office. We also expect that as specific topics arise, we will be consulting with additional agencies. For example, we would need to consult with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on energy topics related to habitat and energy facility siting and permitting. The next one on there, the advisory group, will be made up of stakeholders with diverse perspectives to help provide feedback on a wide range of topics that would range from process elements as well as to policy recommendations. The technical working group will be focused on supporting data and modeling efforts. Also, with the support of the contractor I mentioned before, that we're still in the process of developing that RFP, that contractor will be focused on facilitation, and we will be planning to have community meetings and listening sessions and small group discussions where we can discuss priorities and questions and get feedback on proposed data, assumptions, and the modeling approach. As I mentioned earlier, we will be working directly with the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon through government-to-government coordination and discussion. And we plan to share drafts for written feedback and comments, such as draft modeling results, draft policy recommendations, and draft reports. And we continue to be open to hearing your ideas for options and to provide input and feedback. We're still in that process of the contractor, like I mentioned, so some of the details will be worked out with that contractor on board. But if you're interested in learning more about the advisory groups or have questions about participating or what the structure of community meetings might look like, we are open to your ideas, and you can email the email address here, energystrategy@energy.oregon.gov, as well as signing up for our distribution list on our website. Next slide, please. So this slide is the same as the one that you saw earlier, and Abby, you might have to click through to see some of the circles appear. You can just go ahead and click through all of them. Just wanting to add emphasis on when the input and feedback will be occurring. So where you see engagement and review and comment, that's where you will see the advisory group meetings that I mentioned, the listening sessions, the community meetings, and opportunity to provide written comments that we just talked about. And the next slide is another question for you all. So you should see the Slido pop up in a moment. And this is really asking you what your preferred methods of engagement with us would be in this process. Do you like informational webinars? Do you like focused meetings that are virtual or in person? Are you interested in contributing some of your time to engage more deeply on a specific topic? Are you interested in providing public comments on draft documents or something else, which we would love to hear about more in the chat? I'll give you all a moment to check these options. And just a reminder to make sure to scroll down and hit send when you've checked your preferred methods here. Seeing some strong interest in focused meetings, virtual and in person. Seeing some interest in contributing time, which is great. So glad to see that. Looks like there's still some interest in informational webinars, so you're hopefully enjoying this one as an example. And providing public comments to draft documents as well. Seeing it slow down a little bit here, so give you a couple more moments here to make your selections and hit send. Well, we're also looking for the 4% of you that put them in the chat. We'd love to hear more ideas. And with that, we can move to the next slide. And I think that I'll be passing it over for some potential Q&A. So if you have questions that you can put them in the chat, and we have a few folks here who are interested in helping to answer what we can, and knowing that we don't have all the answers yet, but want to know what your questions are.
Thanks, Ruchi. So my name is Jessica Rikers, and if you aren't familiar with me, I'm the Technology and Policy Manager here at Odo. And I'm here to sort of open up the Q&A session to go with this meeting that we've had here. So the first thing I want you to know is that obviously this indicates there's a lot of work that we need to get done in the next 2 years. And we're going to start all of that, as Ida showed, by just listening to what energy matters are relevant to you, your organizations, your work, and your goals. And we're really looking forward to diving into these conversations about what Oregon's energy future might entail. So that's all coming. So right now I'd like to just open up for questions about the Oregon Energy Strategy development process, and you can enter them into the chat. I've already got a few going on here, so I'm gonna start working through those here in just a second. If you aren't familiar with how to access chat, if you look in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, there's a chat button that you can push that will help the chat pop up for you. Make sure that when you're sending your message that you are addressing that message to everyone. That's the default, but there's an option to address people privately, and don't do that because then we won't know that your question is there. So the questions that we had that kind of came up earlier that I just want to address, and I think Edith might be helping me with some of these as we walk through, but I'll just go through a couple of them. The first question was just some general discussion on whether we will be taking into account sort of what preparations might need to occur in order to better prepare Oregon's energy systems for a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And we absolutely will be taking that in consideration. I also wanted to mention that we have another process happening at the agency right now, which is called the development of the Energy Security Plan. This is being led by a separate division within the agency. And I'm hoping that one of my Odo colleagues will throw the link up to the Energy Strategy webpage so people can sign up, or I'm sorry, the Energy Security Plan webpage. So if people want to sign up to get updates on that or provide comment, there's an opportunity to do so. That project really is focusing on the risks and threats to Oregon's energy systems and identifying prioritized mitigation options that can be mitigated in the future to improve Oregon's energy security. And while absolutely these two plans, the Energy Security Plan and the Energy Strategy, will be informing one another, they are also happening simultaneously. So if you're interested in the Energy Security Plan, you want to go out and check out that webpage about that. The next question that we got was just a wonder if we were going to provide a review of all the policies and programs that are currently in play that can help us realize our Oregon energy goals. And yes, there's so many things happening right now in the energy policy sphere, which may have an effect on our energy strategy, and already do have an effect on that. So those things like that are happening in state agencies, that's why we brought some of our state agency partners in to talk about the work that they're doing. But there are other things happening, as was mentioned by one of the people on this call. There's activities happening at the local level. There's activities happening with other organizations that are outside of state government. And those will all influence and be a part of what we need to look at as far as Oregon's entire energy landscape. Another question that we got was around whether or not, or what do we mean by engaging with stakeholders for our work on the energy strategy? And we mean all stakeholders. That runs from our sister agencies. As Ruchi pointed out, they're a group of stakeholders that we're very interested in, but we're also interested in what private organizations are working on and their goals when it comes to energy. We're very interested as well in what local organizations, community organizations are thinking about the energy strategy and the effects of energy decisions on those communities. And members of the public are always welcome to provide their insight and input. And we have a webpage set up for the Oregon Energy Strategy. It will be on the final slide here, but you can go to that webpage to, one, sign up for email updates so that you know all the different things that are happening with the energy strategy. But two, you can also go in and add your comments or provide questions into a portal that we have. So it's a place for us to engage, to have a conversation. That's one place for us to have a conversation with folks. So feel free to go into that webpage and sign up for all of those things and provide us with comments. We will be collecting comments frequently and regularly throughout this process.
Jessica, are you ready to take some of the questions that have come in?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Great. I'm going to do one that's pretty simple, I think, and I can probably answer it, and then I think we'll ask a second question. I think Amy's on the line to answer the second one, if that works. Tim Miller pointed out that it would be nice if people could see the list of attendees today. We use WebEx for our big meetings like this, and it doesn't allow us to share the list in the same way Zoom, you can see who's on a webinar. So in the past, what we've done, and I'll see if we can do this time, is publish that list post the meeting on our website along with the meeting materials from today. We've done that in the past because it's not an intention that the list be private. It just is like a funny way that WebEx does things. And then the question that I think Amy is ready to tackle comes from Jennifer Jolly. Hi, Jennifer. It's so good to see you always here. And I'll just read her question aloud quickly and then hand it over to Amy. Jennifer wants to know how we plan to ensure that stakeholder feedback is not siloed. Would small groups all be separate interests and perspective? It seems important that various stakeholders with different priorities and perspectives have an opportunity to develop consensus, or at least ensure that the strategy notes that consensus could not be achieved. And so related, who decides when consensus is not achieved? Is that Odo? And I'll hand things over to Amy, if that's all right.
Thank you, Christy. And yes, thank you, Jennifer, for that great question. We have tried to be very deliberate in designing our stakeholder approach for the energy strategy. We absolutely want to hear from as many voices as possible, and we want to ensure that the strategy reflects a broad group of perspectives and reflects perspectives from different interests, different geographic areas, different age groups, et cetera. And so we haven't completely determined what those listening sessions, the small group listening sessions, will look like yet. And that's in large part because we are planning to hire a facilitation contractor, and we want their input and expertise in helping to design what those listening sessions look like. But right now we're planning them to be small groups because we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable engaging and feels like it's a safe space to provide their input. That said, so we are anticipating right now designing those groups more or less around like different focus areas. That said, like we are not necessarily anticipating that this will be a consensus-driven process. Like we want to hear from people. We want to know what their priorities are. We want to know what their concerns about, or what their concerns are, and what really matters to them. And there's no right or wrong answer to those questions. And so we're really trying to make sure that we can capture all of that input and record it, and then convey that information to legislators and policymakers and other stakeholders. But we aren't anticipating, voting on different decisions relating to the energy strategy. It's not really that type of a process. And if I failed to capture anything, please, any of my colleagues should feel welcome to jump in.
You can add your follow-up questions if needed, if there's anything that we didn't quite address that you were hoping to get. My next question is a question about how can stakeholders get involved in the smaller groups that Ruchi was mentioning earlier. And I'd like to pass that one over to Edith. Edith is available.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So there are a few ways to get involved, as Ruchi mentioned. So I'll answer this question in two parts because I'm not sure what's meant by smaller groups. So we plan to have a series of listening sessions, and for those, we'll be working with our consultant once we have them on board to help gather together how we would organize those listening sessions and what configuration. So that's part of the answer, but I'll add to that we realize that it's quite a broad ecosystem of people involved, and we can't assume that we have a view of everybody who would want to be involved. So we really encourage people to reach out to us. At the end of this presentation, if you would go to the next slide, you can see some contact information, both my email address and a general email address. So please let us know if you want to get involved and how. So that's kind of a plug just to make sure that that we're as inclusive as possible. And then I'll also mention that we have these three kind of advisory groups. One is the interagency steering group. We'll have a technical working group and an advisory group. And both the technical group and the advisory group, we still need to work out how exactly those are going to be structured, but both will involve opportunities both to avoid some of the siloing that could happen, referring back to Jennifer Jolly's comment. I'll just have to say, stay tuned on that. But again, it's really helpful if you sign up on our website for email updates. Just because you participated in this webinar doesn't mean that you're automatically on our mailing list. We have to be very careful with data protection. So we'd like you to explicitly ask to be on the mailing list for any updates. And we'll also post information on our website on the project page that you can see here. And I don't know whether Amy or anybody else wants to add to what I just said.
I just want to acknowledge that we are at time. We agreed to end this at noon. However, we do have a few more questions, and I and some folks from Odo are going to stay on for a little while longer so that we can address those. We'll make the Q&A available for people to see if you can't stay around later on. And and if you want to keep throwing questions in there, we can do that. We can also reach out to people individually if necessary. So maybe just a few more minutes to answer some of the questions. I did get a question. I don't think it went to the whole group, but it came to me. So I just want to flag it right now, which is how will members of the advisory committee be selected for the energy strategy? And so Edith, I'd like to put that back to you as well.
Thanks. And Amy, maybe you can help me answer this question because we've been sort of brainstorming this. So the quick answer is maybe just to elaborate a little bit on the idea that we have for the advisory group, which is that it would be really a mix of people representing kind of different points of view coming together to get updates on the energy strategy and to discuss it. So how exactly we're going to structure that group is we still haven't gotten there because we're really early on in the process, but we want to make sure that we have a pretty diverse mix in there. And then Amy, I don't know if you want to add anything on the process that where you've advanced in the thinking beyond that.
No, I mean, I think you captured it. We are still working out those details. We would like input from our facilitation contractor when they come on board. But ultimately, our main objective is to make sure that group reflects a diversity of perspectives.
I'll just add that while we don't have the structure right now, if you've had experiences working on other projects with advisory committees, have some lessons learned or ideas, we love to hear that as we're continuing to work out those details as the facilitator comes on board. And you have some contact information to do exactly that.
Thanks, Edith, Amy, and Ruchi. I do want to get back to a couple other questions. We have a couple questions that I've seen while this webinar has been going on, and they kind of relate to how are we going to incorporate certain pieces of information about energy. For example, the most recent one was from Tim, and he asked us how we're going to incorporate demand side into our vision regarding climate migration. I'm sorry, how we're going to use demand side energy in the energy strategy, and also what we're thinking about with regards to climate migration and how that might affect our energy use going forward. These are all things that we don't have answers for right now because we need all of you and many others to help inform us about what kinds of things we should be looking at or gathering information on or looking at data on. So I have a very unsatisfying answer, Tim, which is we'll be reaching out to you and we want to hear from you what kinds of things we should be thinking about in that area, as well as other topics that people think are really important for us to know as we start to develop this energy strategy. Okay, I am floating down through the questions and I don't see any other questions that are up. Did I miss any questions that Amy or Edith, you've seen in the chat that we haven't addressed yet?
I just see one that maybe relates back to the kind of the different working groups that we'll have. And on the technical working group, there's a question of what type of people we foresee on the technical in the technical group and whether it would be utilities. And I'll just say that yes, certainly utilities have a lot of expertise and we want that expertise in the room, but it won't be limited to utilities. So we want to make sure that we, and it also depends on the topic. So, you know, when we're talking about buildings, for example, and end use energy efficiency, there will be a different mix of experts in that room than the experts who are talking about high voltage transmission lines, right? So it'll depend. So the way that we've been talking about the technical group is as kind of an umbrella group that includes all of the expertise that we need for the energy strategy, which is pretty broad. But then we'll have focused discussions around different topics, and then people will come into the room who are experts on that topic. So again, we're in early stages in defining who that would be, but stay tuned, and we're hoping that with our project page, our website, email, direct outreach will maintain open channels of communication to be sure that we get the right balance in the room and the right experts.
Thanks, Edith. I did miss that question from Jennifer. Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I just was wondering if we had responded to my former colleague, Kara Saylor's question in the chat. She asked, wondering if the energy strategy will identify places where agencies might support Oregon's climate goals, which I think is a great question and one that we're very prepared to answer. So Edith, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's actually one of the reasons that we're doing the energy strategy and why we are coming together with other state agencies early on to kind of come together in one room, and also why we're trying to engage in different ways with the broader public, because some of the best ideas will come from observations of how we're all doing as agencies. I don't know, Jessica or Amy, if you would want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great answer. And I would just add that I think this is a key component of the energy strategy. While we don't anticipate, I mean, we certainly are not going to be telling other agencies what they have to do. Part of this analysis will be figuring out what needs to get done and how we can implement various strategies to help achieve our energy policy goals. And so part of that will be identifying where there are opportunities for agencies and where there are barriers to agencies implementing existing policies to help achieve our existing objectives. We really want to work with other agencies to help identify those barriers and try to come up with solutions. And then when we identify gaps that need to be filled, the legislation does authorize ODO to produce policy recommendations and communicate those recommendations to the legislature.
Thanks. Excellent. So Edith, I have another question that I'm going to float to you. This is from Pat. They want to know if we as ODO with our facilitator are going to do, and our technical contractor too, I'm adding that part, also going to do a full sector energy system modeling to inform the strategy. Do you want to approach that one?
Yeah, so it would be the technical consultant. So just to be clear, we'll have two consultants who we'd like to contract, one on facilitation and one on the technical side. And we do plan to undertake a pretty in-depth modeling exercise to inform the energy strategy that looks across the energy system. How exactly that will look will depend on the modeling capabilities of who we select. But we do intend to undertake a kind of a full energy sector modeling exercise to help understand the different pathways and what the implications are. And that's where it'll get pretty interesting and maybe a little bit different from some of the studies that we looked at in our biennial energy report in 2022, because we now have this kind of list of considerations that we need to include in figuring out how to balance the trade-offs that are in the bill.
Absolutely. And I would want to add on there that there are many studies that have been done and planning efforts that have been and or are ongoing considering energy use. Particularly, what comes to mind is some of the utility integrated resource plans and clean energy plans. And to the extent that we can, we want to use that information. We're not going to recreate the wheel. I was going to say recreate the mousetrap because I mix up metaphors. We're not going to recreate the wheel on that. We want to use what's available out there. And so to the extent that we can. So that's another piece of this that I think is important to note there. And Natasha asked a question. She's asked a couple of questions around the RFP process for this for our technical and facilitating contractor. She wants to know what the timeline is to fulfill those. And Edith, I'll pass it to you. I just want to also answer another question that she asked earlier about the RFPs. Will they be made public? The RFPs themselves will post on the state of Oregon's website that hosts all types of RFPs and other types of contracting announcements. And so that's called ORPN. Don't ask me what it stands for. I won't remember, but it will be made available so people can see the RFPs that Odo is putting out for a technical and facilitating contractor. Edith, do you have information on timeline?
I have somewhat fuzzy information on timeline. So the RFPs will come out at the same time. Since the facilitation and the technical work are so closely intertwined, we want both to go out at the same time. That means that it's taking a little bit longer to get the RFPs out, but the RFPs should be out, as Jessica said. They will be out kind of for the public, and it's a competitive process in the next few weeks.
And a lovely member of our team just notified me that I'm using old language. It was called ORPN. It's now called Oregon Buys. Apologies for that. So Oregon Buys is the website. So we've got, I think we've got most of the questions answered. And Tracy, I see your last question there. I think this is really more appropriate to that energy security plan work that we're doing. So I'll respond to you individually so we can get you to the right place. But any other questions out there? Thank you, Michael, for posting the Oregon Buys website if you're interested in looking at the RFPs when they are released. Any other questions people want to throw into the chat? If you asked a question and we didn't address it, please feel free to throw that in there as well. And I just want to remind folks that we do have a web page that's up here on your screen where you can not only sign up for updates, email updates on what things are happening with the Oregon Energy Strategy, but you can also provide comment, ask us questions through the portal that's available for doing that. All of that's available on that page. Edith is our project lead and her email is available up there. Amy, her email went in earlier, is Edith's right-hand person. So if you have questions, Amy would be happy to help with those as well. And I don't see any other questions coming into the chat. Amy, Edith, is there anything that I missed that you thought we needed to address?
I may have missed this, but did you respond to Tim's question about the demand side?
I did, with
Okay.
a very high level, which is good point. Tell us what you want us to look at.
Thank you. Sorry, trying to multitask and just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything.
I hear you.
There is a question that just came in, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm just going to ask it out loud, whether we can post the RFPs or a link to the RFPs on our website as well, on the project website. Is that something that we can do?
I see that from Jennifer. Jennifer, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I would want to talk to our procurement team, but I suspect the answer is that it all needs to be on Oregon Buys. But I will find out and we will get back to you. It's a good question though. And I've never gotten on Oregon Buys, so I don't know how hard it is to navigate or not. Okay. Well, thank you all for the questions. if any more questions come up, you have many ways of contacting us. Please feel free to reach out through your questions into that portal as I indicated. And just keep that project page as your resource if you're interested in following along. And if you've signed up, you'll get email updates as well. And I am happy to hang out until everybody's gone, but otherwise I think we will call this meeting to close. Oh, Edith, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just a few very quick points, just to say that the presentation and recording will be available on the website shortly. We've also published a charter document, which is also up on that website that you see here on the project page, that provides a lot of the information we gave today, but it's all written down in kind of a clear form. So you can refer to that also to understand kind of the process and vision that we're working with. And a few things to look out for. We'll send around a survey, a more complete survey than the polling that we did today, to gather some more views, both on process, to hear what you thought of this webinar, and to help us as we move forward. And finally, I just wanted to say thank you again to all of our colleagues at the Oregon Public Utilities Commission, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Land Conservation and Development, Department of Transportation, Business Oregon, and also the Governor's Office. For thank you for your support, and colleagues at Odo. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good day.